Congratulations.
Thank you very
Good
much.
luck.
Really appreciate it.
About ready to start, guys?
Yep.
All right, let's do it.
Is that on?
Yes, I have it on.
Hello, Senator. So federal mandates put financial burdens on schools. How can you push for more federal funding for Pennsylvania schools to ease that financial burden? About 80% of Holyoke students said it's unfair that the federal government puts mandates on schools without providing funding for them.
Yeah. Well, there's two ways to deal with that problem. One is you can just shift more money. The other way is you could cut back on the mandates. And I prefer the latter of those two. The most recent education, primary and secondary education bill that was passed was designed to do exactly that, to diminish the extent of federal mandates on state and local education. Historically, education has always been a local responsibility, and I think it's better that way. I'm not in favor of the federal government taking over and federalizing education. So I think that's the better approach, to just continue to scale back the mandates that we impose.
So how do you think that security concerns should be dealt with by schools, and how can the federal government help? About 93% of Holyoke students said that having a security officer is essential for their safety. Would you be willing to provide federal funding to ensure that each school across our Commonwealth and the United States has a security guard?
So again, I'm not at all convinced that a one-size-fits-all approach is the best way to deal with security issues. Security issues vary. They are different in a big city school district versus a very rural school district, and we're better off letting communities decide what is the best way to achieve security right there at their school. Now, having said that, there are some things that I think we can do, and one of them is to have a federal background check system that will make it more difficult for people to buy guns if they shouldn't have a gun in the first place. So I'm a believer in the Second Amendment, and I think a law-abiding citizen has a personal constitutional right to a firearm. I don't think it's a contradiction to suggest that a person also should have a background check before they purchase a firearm, because we all agree that dangerous criminals and people who are dangerously mentally ill should not be allowed to buy firearms. Well, you need a mechanism to determine whether or not someone attempting to make a purchase is in one of those two categories. So I introduced legislation with Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia that would expand background checks to any venue that is commercial in nature, so a gun show or over the internet. Now, in Pennsylvania, all handgun sales require a background check, regardless of whether it's done commercially or whether a brother sells a handgun to his sibling, right? That requires a background check, but it does not apply on long guns. And there are some states that don't have that requirement that Pennsylvania, the universal requirement that Pennsylvania has on handguns. So I think strengthening our background check system makes a lot of sense and could contribute to greater safety in schools. And there's one other bill that's worth mentioning, and that is thousands of people across America every year, probably every month, attempt to buy firearms despite the fact that they're legally prohibited from doing so. So a person with a prior felony conviction that's not supposed to buy a firearm nevertheless goes, they lie about their felony conviction on the application form, and they try to buy the gun. When the background check is done, the FBI usually, which conducts most of the background checks in the country, they discover that this has happened. Well, the attempt to buy a firearm when you're illegally prohibited is itself a crime, but it's a crime that almost never gets prosecuted. So I have a bill with Chris Coons, Democrat from Delaware, that would require the FBI to share that information when they discover somebody illegally attempting to purchase a gun, share that information with state law enforcement officials from the state in which the person resides. It doesn't require a prosecution, but it gives state law enforcement folks another tool. So these are the kinds of things that I think are entirely within the appropriate realm of the federal government, which could enhance security at schools.
Thank you. So, because I'm going into college now, and the rise of college tuition costs has been exponential over the past few years. So what is your opinion on the rising cost of college tuition, and how do you propose we tackle the issue? 59% of Holyoke students said that public colleges should be tuition free, and 74% agreed that a price ceiling should be set on the price of tuition.
Yeah, well, you know, there's really no such thing as a free service. It's just a question of who's paying for it, right? So the question is who should pay for a person's education. And I think as a general matter, we should acknowledge the person who benefits the most from a college education is presumably the person who received the college education. That's why he or she went for it. And to suggest that somebody who didn't go to college, maybe went straight to work, may not earn as much money, their tax dollars should go to subsidize the person who is getting the benefits of the college education, I think we have to be careful how far we go down that road. So I'm not in favor of free college security. Now, having said that, I have supported Pell Grants, and I've supported ways to expand the opportunities for people who would have a hard time being able to afford college. One of the things that I think we owe, and we don't do a good job of, is letting students and their parents know what kind of outcomes does a particular college get. So before you go in and sign up for a very, very large bill for the next 4 years, I think it would be useful to know whether graduates from that college typically are able to get gainful employment, right?
As you at Harvard.
Yeah, that would be a good thing for people to know.
Yeah.
And do people typically get employment in the field that you're thinking about studying, or do they end up having to do something totally different? That information, I think, would be very useful to people to decide whether or not a particular program at a particular college is worth it for them. I have legislation that I have sponsored that would require the disclosure of that kind of information so that parents and students could make well-informed decisions.
So, do you think that the federal government should set base standards on what each American should have an education on? And also, what's your opinion on standardized testing? So 62% of Hollidaysburg students said that the federal government should be more involved in education, but on the contrary, 80% oppose that standardized testing should be required.
Yeah, so I don't think the federal government should be establishing these standards. I think this has always been the responsibility of states, which almost invariably delegate that to local school districts, and that's a better place to do it. The educational priorities in San Francisco are going to be different than the educational priorities in Blair County, Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be very different. And rather than forcing one standard on both, I think it's much better to leave that up to the respective communities. Personally, I have my personal preference. I think we should teach more about civics and history and some of the fundamental principles at the heart of the founding of this country. But there are people who are going to disagree with me, and they would rather spend time teaching other topics. I'd rather let that get hashed out at the local level where parents have the most ability to influence the school curriculum because they can actually meet with their school board members, they can meet with the superintendent, they can elect or unelect people who are not representing their priorities. It's much better and more accountable at that local level than to have the federal government dictating this.
Okay, so I'm just, what I meant by that is kind of, do you think that we should each have at least some knowledge of like the base standard kind of? So I'm saying that every American has that kind of common piece of.
Yeah, so I think we do to a significant degree, but I wouldn't want that to be a federal mandate. I think most states want to have a curriculum that makes sense, that's competitive, so that their graduates will have a good grounding, will be ready for whatever's next in their life, whether it's higher education or military service or joining the workforce. I don't think we should assume that the federal government is going to do a better job of that than the various states.
So you've been to Altoona and Hollidaysburg before, but would you be willing to participate in a town hall meeting in our community to discuss education in the near future?
Well, I generally don't do town halls that are organized and sponsored by other outside groups. We do our own various ways of reaching out to constituents. So I'll probably continue to do that, which we do in a variety of ways.
Thank you very much, Mr. Senator.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah, very nice meeting.